By their father's plan, 3 children were concealed from the world for more than 20 years by masks, veils, and bed linens. Almost all of the time, they left with nothing but fabric and shadow as cameras pursued them through airport terminals and hotel halls, in an attempt to get a clear view of their faces. Their names were well known. In front of yelling spectators, their father had dangled one of them off a hotel balcony. The world had witnessed them, walking next to the most photographed man on the planet, while covered in white sheets. But that was precisely the point. Nearly no one had seen them. Control, image, and the careful manipulation of what the public was permitted to know were the cornerstones of Michael Jackson's entire public persona. For 30 years, he used reinvention and surgery to dominate his own face. When his children were born, he used the same urge to conceal their identities before they were even old enough to comprehend why. He controlled his stage character down to the tiniest gesture. However, the true mystery was never the masks. On late-night television, they were the visible portion that everyone could see, discuss about, and make jokes about. Beneath all of that, the true secret remained silent and unsolved. And long after their father had passed away, it continued to follow his 3 children. It was a question concerning their true origins, whose blood flowed through them, and why those who could have provided an explanation opted to remain silent. You have to go all the way back to the year Michael Jackson made the decision to become a father in order to comprehend the extent of that concealment. Jackson was already the most closely watched performer in the world by the middle of the 1990s. Talk shows and tabloids analyze every move. After his brief and well-reported marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, the public expected that any intentions he had for becoming a parent would take place in public, with announcements, photo sessions, and magazine covers much like most celebrity lives do. Rather, Jackson wed Debbie Rowe, a dermatology nurse who had collaborated with his longtime doctor. Nearly everyone who heard about the marriage was perplexed by it. Rowe was not well known. She was not interested in being famous. She seldom did interviews, and when she did, she described her relationship with Jackson as more of an arrangement than a marriage. In a famous comment from 2003, she said that she didn't want her kids to call her mum since, in her opinion, they weren't truly hers to claim. She explained that she had given them to Michael because she thought he should be a parent and that having kids for him was just something she could do for a loved one. It was an odd, almost professional way of describing parenthood, and it sowed the seeds of a question that would develop over the course of the following 20 years. What exactly had transpired behind the scenes to bring these children into the world if their mother described them as a gift rather than a family? You practically have to go back in time to Jackson's early years, long before any of his children were born, to truly comprehend why he became so fixated on protecting his offspring. When Michael Jackson performed in front of an audience as a member of the Jackson at the age of 5, he was under the stringent and even punitive guidance of his father, Joe Jackson. Michael was already a professional entertainer, well known on the scene, and bearing the financial burden of his family's survival on his tiny shoulders by the time other kids were beginning to read. In subsequent interviews and his own writing, he frequently discussed how he felt like he never really had a childhood, how he envied the ordinary, forgettable freedom of being nameless, and how he watched other children play in parks from the window of a tour van. He never seemed to get over that feeling of loss. It influenced the way he constructed Neverland Ranch, an entire estate designed to provide other kids with the experience he believed he had been deprived, complete with rides, animals, and a candy-filled movie theater. And it influenced his approach to fatherhood, possibly even more directly. His children's childhood would be characterized by the opposite extreme, if his own had been characterized by utter exposure and lack of privacy. Even if it meant going to extremes that seemed strange or extravagant to the outside world, he would give them what he had never had. The veils and masks, in his opinion, had nothing to do with concealing something horrible. They were a reverse inheritance of his own stolen privacy, an attempt to provide his children with the anonymity he had searched for and failed to obtain throughout his life. In 1997, Prince Michael Jackson Jr. was born, and his sister Paris followed 2 years later. Jackson viewed their privacy as virtually holy from the moment they arrived, even more so than his own. Everywhere he went, he was recognized as public property, and he couldn't even go down a street without being crowded. He frequently expressed in interviews and discussions with those close to him that he did not want that existence for his children. Thus, he made a choice that would shape his children's life for the next 10 years. They would always cover their faces when they were in public. Sometimes it was only a veil. Occasionally, it was a complete mask with painted features and blank eyes, similar to what you might find in a costume store. Sometimes it was just a bedsheet thrown over a pram, like in the most well-known and ridiculed case. It was considered as a joke by tabloids. Comedians created whole routines based on the Jackson kids wearing masks. When explicitly questioned about it, however, Debbie Rowe said something that was seldom included in the jokes. She said that she, not Michael, had come up with the idea to hide their faces. She claimed that she was the one who pushed for the hiding because she was afraid for his kids, and that he was proud of them and wanted to flaunt them. That the prevalent perception of Jackson as a lone, eccentric parent who conceals his children out of conceit or paranoia is complicated by this little truth. In rather different ways, two parents were attempting to safeguard something they both seemed to perceive as vulnerable. The most notorious instance of the concealment occurred in November 2002 in Berlin, when Jackson emerged onto a hotel balcony with his youngest child, a baby who would later be known to the public as Blanket, and momentarily dangled him over the railing in front of a throng of enthusiastic fans 4 stories below. In a matter of hours, the image became viral on all news outlets worldwide. It was described as risky by commentators. Advocates for child welfare described it as hazardous. Jackson, on the other hand, maintained that he would never actually endanger a child, stating that the crowd had been chanting for a peek of the infant, and that he just wanted to fulfill their request. He eventually referred to it as an error, but significantly, he refrained from stating so explicitly in the documentary that would soon make the episode even more notorious. Living with Michael Jackson, a documentary directed by journalist Martin Bashir, was meant to be a personal and compassionate look at the man who created the legend. Rather, it turned into one of the most significant media projects in which Jackson ever took involved. Because it was here, on camera, that he made a statement about his kids that no one had previously heard him make. Using nearly clinical language, Jackson informed Bashir that Blanket was conceived using a surrogate mother and his own sperm, adding that neither he nor she knew each other. On the surface, it sounded like a straightforward explanation, the kind of statement that ought to have definitively resolved the issue. However, Jackson later contradicted himself in the same program, claiming that he had been seeing the unnamed mother at the time of the child's conception. Within the same 90 minutes of tape, he made 2 statements for the same camera team that described 2 distinct accounts of the birth of his youngest child. In the midst of the outrage surrounding the balcony incident, it was easy for casual viewers to overlook this minor discrepancy. However, that contradiction became one of the first holes in the official narrative for those who would spend the next 20 years attempting to piece together the true story of the Jackson children's origins. The first indication that the whole story might be more nuanced than anything Jackson was willing to publicly state. Jackson's own inconsistent statements and the actions of those closest to him are what make this question so enduring. As part of her divorce from Jackson, Debbie Rowe, whose name appears on both Prince and Paris's birth certificates, signed contracts restricting her ability to discuss the children and their birth circumstances in public. She was virtually completely absent from their lives for years following, making only infrequent appearances and giving occasional interviews in which she answered some questions and sidestepped others. Together with Jackson's own conflicting public remarks, that kind of emotional and legal distance created an environment that was conducive to conjecture, which is precisely what filled the void. Tabloid outlets started spreading unsubstantiated allegations that none of Jackson's 3 children had received genetic material from him. These assertions were never supported by court records or validated DNA testing. These unconfirmed claims claimed that Rowe had only acted as a surrogate for Prince and Paris, giving birth to children that were purportedly conceived using donor sperm from someone else and were not her genuine children. Arnold Klein, Jackson's longtime dermatologist and, most significantly, Debbie Rowe's former employer, was one name that kept coming up in these allegations. Anonymous sources cited in entertainment publications claim that Klein and Rowe had decided to keep the details of his purported biological relationship with the kids a secret. It is crucial to state unequivocally that no official source, court document, or publicly available DNA test has ever verified this claim. Even now, it is still only an unidentified insider's claim rather than a proven truth. Years later, a second name entered the rumor mill when a man named Jason Pfeiffer, who identified himself as a close friend of Michael Jackson, claimed in an interview that Jackson had told him just before he passed away that the sperm used to conceive Prince and Paris had been donated by British actor Mark Lester, best known for his childhood role in the movie Oliver. When Jackson purportedly made this confession, Pfeiffer described his tone as cool and almost nonchalant, as if it were just a practical detail rather than a very private secret. Lester has discussed his long-standing friendship with Jackson in public, and throughout the years, he has made remarks that some have read as suggesting a biological relationship with the kids, though he has never provided any concrete evidence to support this theory. Once more, no legal document has ever surfaced, no DNA test has ever been made public, and the entire claim is based on hearsay rather than confirmed proof. There were further rumors. The youngest of the 3, Blanket, went by a different name, Marlon Brando, which seemed almost too dramatic to be taken seriously. Brando, who was renowned for being one of Jackson's closest pals in his later years, may have contributed sperm to the surrogate pregnancy that resulted in Blanket in 2002, according to stories attributed to unidentified insiders close to the Jackson family. Both Paris and Prince are claimed to have been informed of the claim as adults, and sources describe the purported disclosure as causing stress within the larger Jackson family circle when it supposedly came to light. Fans cited specific physical similarities as purported proof, the kind of informal visual analysis that goes viral on the internet but doesn't prove anything. Like every other paternity allegation involving the Jackson children, this one has never been supported by anything other than conjecture, secondhand clear-throat sourcing, and the public's need for a dramatic turn of events. Brando passed away in 2004, 2 years after Blanket was born. The extent to which the legal documentation surrounding each birth was sealed is one reason why these specific rumors have endured for so long, refusing to evaporate the way most celebrity gossip eventually does. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, surrogacy agreements were rarely carried out with the same level of transparency as they are now, and Jackson's legal staff was infamously strict about maintaining secrecy wherever feasible. According to reports, the surrogate mother who carried Blanket was never even informed of the child's parent. Later reporting revealed a detail that, if accurate, suggested even she might not have gotten the complete picture. Confidentiality clauses in Debbie Rowe's divorce settlement restricted what she could say in public about the conception of the children, and any private information Arnold Klein may or may not have had was taken with him to his grave when he died in 2015. No public deathbed affirmation or denial was ever directly attributed to him. The Jackson family's silence had more leeway in a time before court-ordered testing or leaked lab results were used to settle celebrity DNA issues. And all the theories anyone could think of flowed into that room. Since so many different names have been proposed as potential biological dads, it would be simple to regard everything as decided at this point and conclude that one of them must be true. However, such presumption ignores a crucial aspect of how rumors like these truly proliferate. Unfalsifiable claims, stories that cannot be conclusively refuted since there is no official record in either direction, are the foundation of tabloid culture. Furthermore, it was very impossible to dispel this specific set of rumors due to the Jackson family's well-established predilection for solitude. Online investigators saw every refusal to respond, sealed legal agreement, and awkward pause in an interview as more proof that something was being concealed. To be fair, it was obvious that something was being concealed, at least with regard to the specific medical and legal aspects of each child's conception. However, a proved conspiracy is not the same as hidden details, and the majority of this story actually exists in the space between those two things. More than any unconfirmed rumor, the story's emotional impact comes from the children's eventual reactions when they were old enough to speak for themselves. In public, Paris Jackson in particular has never wavered on this issue. She sobbed as an 11-year-old girl speaking in front of a worldwide television audience at her father's burial ceremony in 2009, stating that her father had been the best parent anyone could ask for since the day she was born. A youngster crying in front of millions of people while the world continued to speculate about whether the man she was mourning was even her biological parent was one of the most emotionally wrenching moments of the entire ceremony. Since then, as an adult pursuing her own career in acting and music, Paris has consistently referred to Michael Jackson as her father without reservation, brushing off the circulating paternity rumors whenever they come up and logically pointing out that there has never been any solid proof to back up any of them. Additionally, she has demonstrated a readiness to openly protest when she believes her father's narrative is being misrepresented. Most notably, she disassociated herself from the most recent biopic about his life, claiming that she had provided thorough feedback on an early script draft that she believed to be dishonest, and that, instead of supporting the project, she decided to leave it completely. Prince has been more reserved about the topic than his sister, but he has also never openly questioned his father's paternity. In interviews over the years, Prince has talked about Michael Jackson with a protective and loving tone that suggests the question does not bother him as much as it does outsiders. Of the three siblings, Biggie, formerly known as Blanket, has been the most reclusive, rarely participating in interviews and hardly ever explicitly addressing the paternity rumors. Ironically, his reticence has only increased conjecture among those who believe that silence must be concealing something. But in actuality, it might just be a reflection of a young man who, after witnessing his siblings being scrutinized by tabloids throughout their entire childhood, made the early decision that he did not want to be involved. The children's lives underwent a different kind of turmoil in the years immediately following Michael Jackson's death in June 2009. This turmoil had nothing to do with paternity rumors, but rather with a very genuine, highly publicized struggle over who would raise them. Katherine Jackson, Jackson's mother, was designated as the children's guardian in Jackson's will. Additionally, a custody agreement was made that gave her primary custody of Prince, Paris, and Blanket. Debbie Rowe, who had been largely absent from her children's lives for years, first indicated that she would not challenge the arrangement. For a while, it appeared that the issue would be resolved amicably without the kind of courtroom drama that frequently surrounds famous people's estates. But the peace did not last. Soon after, disagreements arose regarding Rowe's degree of participation, visitation, and monetary settlements related to her initial contract with Jackson. The family had spent years trying to avoid a public legal struggle by keeping quiet and using sealed documents, but for a while the situation threatened to turn into just that. In the home, the three kids were coping not just with their father's passing, but also with a radical change in their daily lives. The man who had built their whole upbringing around hiding was no longer there, and the masks gradually came off, almost without any formal announcement. By the time of his public memorial, which took place only a few weeks after his passing, Paris and Prince were clearly grieving in front of cameras that had failed to record this moment for 10 years. Growing up, Blanket's face had been seen even less than those of his siblings, and the general public didn't get a true, unhindered glimpse of him until that same ceremony. The unexpected notoriety must have caused confusion for three youngsters who had lived their entire lives as purposefully hidden figures, anguish exacerbated by exposure, and privacy lost just when they needed it most. The Jackson children had an odd dilemma as they matured into teenagers and eventually adults. Nearly every aspect of their public life remained linked to their father's legacy. Despite their desire to break free from his shadow and forge their own identities, they went to family get-togethers with a thriller theme. Tribute musicals based on his catalog featured them. They answered questions about their upbringing as his children in almost every interview, all the while attempting to live as young people navigating relationships, education, and careers like everyone else their age. When the documentary Leaving Neverland, which featured detailed claims of childhood sexual abuse from two men who claimed Jackson had molested them decades previously, premiered in 2019, the tension reached a terrible high. People close to the family said that the three siblings were saddened by the movie and found it difficult to reconcile the claims with the father they knew, especially since Wade Robson, one of the accusers, was someone they had known for years. At the time, Jackson's brother Jackie told reporters that the kids were having difficulty processing what they were witnessing, that it was upsetting for them, and that he thought they would eventually express themselves in their own manner when they were ready. Children who had already spent their entire lives under surveillance were subjected to more public attention as a result of the documentary, which also revived past scars for the entire family. This time, they were forced to defend not only their father's reputation, but also their own early recollections against a barrage of damaging testimony that was broadcast on national television. The family's legal disputes did not go away either. In particular, Biggie was at differences with his grandmother, Katherine Jackson, on choices pertaining to his father's estate. He publicly criticized arrangements that he believed were not in the best interests of the family and resisted decisions made by the executors of the estate. In one hotly contested case, a judge ultimately decided in favor of the executors. Even though Katherine Jackson filed an appeal, Biggie doubted that the ruling would be overturned. Even decades after Jackson's passing, there was a subtle but significant indication that the family's internal conflicts occasionally came to light. All three of the siblings are now adults in 2026, each leading a unique life while still bearing the burden of their father's name in different ways. Now in his late 20s, Prince has made his home, mostly in Los Angeles, juggling employment in the entertainment sector with humanitarian endeavors, including as a children's fitness program he started years ago that embodies some of the same principles his father openly supported. He openly expressed his wish to see that tale told truthfully and respectfully, and he took on a major behind-the-scenes role as an executive producer on the newly released biopic about his father's life. After almost 8 years of dating, he also announced his engagement to his longtime partner in 2025. This was a peaceful, private moment that was very different from the commotion that overshadowed so much of his early years. Paris, on the other hand, has chosen to completely withdraw from the biography after her worries about the script were not taken into consideration as she had intended. Instead of dedicating herself to a project that she believed misrepresented some facets of her father's life, she has concentrated on her own artistic endeavors, pursuing a career in music, venturing into acting, and investigating fashion. Undertakings that do not limit her to being Michael Jackson's daughter but allow her to develop her public persona on her own terms. In contrast to the secrecy that shaped much of her early life, she has also been open about her struggles with mental health in interviews. It seems as though she made the conscious decision to deal with her own difficult truths in public rather than let them fester behind closed doors, as many of her family's secrets once did. Even though the biopic's fresh focus has brought all three brothers back into the public eye, Biggie is still the most reserved of the three. Even though he continues to keep the majority of his personal life carefully hidden, he has shown hints of his own creative ambition, such as a short film that won him recognition at a small film festival, indicating an interest in storytelling that may eventually lead him toward his own form of public expression. When one looks back at all of it, the masks, the balcony, the conflicting documentary claims, the unsubstantiated paternity rumors involving a dermatologist, an actor, and a Hollywood legend, the custody disputes, the agonizing confrontation with abuse accusations, and ultimately the gradual, intricate process of maturing into adulthood under a magnifying glass, a pattern rather than a single clear secret is revealed. A pattern of a man who was so adept at controlling information about himself that he applied the same instinct to the people he cared about the most, sometimes to protect them and other times, maybe to hide questions he wasn't ready to answer, even to himself. The story's complete cycle has a poetic quality. Convinced that there was a single sensational discovery waiting to be revealed beneath all that fabric and stillness, the world spent 2 decades attempting to remove the masks. In a way, there was a secret, but it wasn't the one that most people anticipated discovering. The secret was never written down on a sealed contract in a lawyer's filing cabinet, nor was it a covert donor agreement. That was not the true secret. It was far more humane and quieter. A father who had lost his own childhood due to celebrity made a valiant, if occasionally awkward, effort to ensure that his kids never lost theirs. And in the process, he erected a wall of secrecy so high that even his own children stood on the wrong side of some of their own truths for years. It won't alter what Prince Paris and Biggie already know about the most important aspect of themselves, regardless of the name that is ultimately given to the paternity issue, whether it remains unsolved indefinitely, or whether some future discovery finally resolves it once and for all. They are aware of the person who put them to sleep at Neverland. Even after he passed away, they are aware of whose hand they grasped at red carpet events decades later. Every time his name is dragged through another round of rumors, they are aware of who they buried and who they still stand up for, both in public and privately. Perhaps that is the true message hidden beneath every mask Michael Jackson has put on his kids' faces. In this family, identity was never solely based on biology. It had to do with who comes, who stays, and who consistently shows up for you. Long after the cameras have finally quit blinking, mask or no mask, secret or not, the subject of whether Michael Jackson was the actual biological father of his 3 children may never be conclusively established or refuted, because those who have the power to do so have generally made the conscious decision to leave it open. However, he was the father of the 3 individuals at the heart of this tale in every way that truly mattered to them, in the only way that ever truly mattered while they were growing up inside Neverland's gates. Despite his imperfections, he reared them while hiding behind masks, blankets, and legal silence. Ultimately, that might be the most accurate information anyone ever gets about this specific secret. Whose blood flowed through their veins was never really a factor. The story revolved around a man who was so adept at manipulating his own story that he was unable to resist doing the same to the 3 kids who desperately needed to know who they were.